Them say, oh God, them things. I think zombie, I think no brain.
Telling you it is what it ain't. Pretending I can do things.
AIDS claimed hundreds of thousands of black lives in the 1980s and 90s, spreading fear across communities that had already endured too much injustice. But few could have imagined that in the midst of that epidemic. There were musicians who had once stood atop the world, their voices shaking New York dance floors, making Chicago churches erupt, only to finally fade away on hospital beds under the weight of ultimate stigma, who secretly infected them, who slipped a deadly virus into the vein of a notorious legend, who had to whisper a confession before they died, and how many filthy truths were buried behind the glamour of Hollywood. Here are the tragedies that truly befell 19 black musicians, people who died in the most harrowing ways, when AIDS quietly stole their final breaths. And this list begins with an R&B angel who pushed himself into the abyss of despair. 19. Bobby DeBarge handed a death sentence right in prison. People still call Bobby DeBarge the R&B angel thanks to a falsetto that melted millions of hearts. But few know that this angel had pushed himself down an inescapable pit. In 1978, Bobby was just 22, standing under Motown's lights, boldly declaring that Switch would become the greatest R&B group of the decade. He wrote and produced almost their entire debut album, pouring his soul into songs like There'll Never Be and Truly. That track put his name at the top of the charts, turning Bobby into the young star Berry Gordy saw as the next Marvin Gaye. But behind the glamour, Bobby gradually slid into addiction like a destiny he could not escape. Friends said there were nights he disappeared from the studio for hours, returning with bloodshot eyes and arms dotted with needle marks. After every vocal take, Bobby would hunch over, coughing dryly. One engineer revealed that the last time they recorded together in Detroit, the room reeked of sweat, anesthesia, and fear. By 1988, when he was arrested for drug possession, Bobby was sent to Michigan prison. Within weeks, he began coughing up blood, burning with fever day and night, his body so frail that every step made him tremble. After many tests, a doctor quietly handed him a paper with his HIV results. That night, he sat in his narrow cell, the yellow light falling across his hollow face. A fellow inmate recalled that for hours, Bobby just stared at the paper without saying a word. Finally, he let out a faint breath, his voice so weak you had to lean close to hear, "I killed myself a long time ago." When he was released in 1989, Bobby no longer had the strength to stand on stage. His body was emaciated, his voice reduced to a feeble rasp, unable to reach the soaring notes that once made audiences weep. No label wanted to bring him back. He rented a small room in Grand Rapids, living quietly, scraping together meager royalty checks to pay for medicine. Sometimes, people saw him gripping the stair rail, gasping just to climb a few steps. At night, neighbors heard his ragged coughing echo on and on before it fell silent, leaving a hush that made everyone shiver. In the summer of 1995, pneumonia worsened. Bobby could no longer sit up on his own. On August 15th, he lay on the hospital bed, his hands wrapped in white bandages, his fingers still clutching the cassette of his last recording, when a nurse came to change the sheets. He tried to open his eyes but could not say a word. Early the next morning, Bobby took his final breath at just 39. No label, no press, no former manager came to attend. Only that cassette kept turning in the quiet, replaying his faint voice, a sorrowful witness that everything had ended in loneliness and exhaustion. 18. Fela Kuti, the man trapped among 20 wives. Did you know that some people spend their entire lives fighting a rotten regime, only to collapse under a secret more terrifying than any torture? Fela Kuti was one such man. He was born in 1938 in Abeokuta, Nigeria, to a famous family of intellectuals. Everyone believed Fela would become a doctor, but he chose music instead, turning Afrobeat into a fire that stirred the whole continent. Even so, beneath the urgent drums and protest songs, Fela's life was always surrounded by scandal, from his libertine lifestyle with over 20 wives to all-night drug parties. People say that on one night in April 1995, Fela received the suicide letter of a trusted dancer. The crumpled note claimed that one of his youngest wives was actually a spy, planted by the government to destroy him from the inside. It also said she had infected him with HIV and secretly reported on his health every month. From that moment, Fela began to panic. Once, he suffered convulsions right in his Lagos studio, coughing blood as he screamed that he was being burned alive. In his final months, Fela wasted away, his skin yellowed, his voice reduced to a thin breath. On the last afternoon of August 2, 1997, he held his eldest son's hand and whispered a strange prophecy. If the truth about the illness came out, his music would be cursed for 20 years. That sentence haunted Nigerian artists for the next decade, making many too afraid to mention his name on stage. Just days after the funeral, a shocking will appeared in the newspapers. It claimed that Fela had confessed to knowingly infecting many wives without warning them. This news ignited a fierce controversy, dividing even those who had called him a legend. Yet no matter how many curses and scandals surrounded him, Fela's Afrobeat lived on, ringing out like a final bell, reminding everyone that sometimes the truth is crueler than any oppression. 17. Tony Washington, victim of a secret drug party. On a stage hazy with purple smoke, people once saw Tony Washington appear in a blazing red silk dress, his voice slicing the silence in two. Artists like him often had to trade everything just to be accepted, and sometimes the price was their very life. In the 1970s, the dynamic Superiors exploded across America, and Tony became the band's soul. Every night, he would kneel on stage, eyes closed, holding the last note of Shoo Shoo Shine as the crowd erupted in applause. But his androgynous look, the blazing lipstick, also sparked endless gossip. After years of success, in 1986, Tony began wasting away, coughing blood and quietly vanishing from the tour schedule. Rumors spread that he had contracted HIV from secret drug parties with an unnamed producer, though no one ever confirmed where that night took place. In March 1989, Tony died in a poor hospital in Washington, D.C. On the nightstand remained only a photo of him singing in a dress in 1975 and a yellowed envelope marked "Copyright of the Last Song." To this day, no one knows whether he sold that legacy out of desperation or fear of being smeared. Sometimes people wonder if Tony had been born a few decades later. Would he still have died so alone? It is painful that such a glorious voice ended its life in silence. 16. James Cleveland, the godfather of gospel and a secret never revealed. No one imagined that the man known as the godfather of gospel was hiding a dangerous secret for years. James Cleveland, the author of over 400 gospel songs, had once stirred the hearts of millions of believers, but at night, he lived another life, full of fear and torment. Around May 1978, during a rehearsal with the Southern California Community Choir, James noticed a young male singer in his early 20s, whose voice was clear as glass. After performances, he often invited the young man to stay behind in the studio, pretending to tweak arrangements. Many nights, they sat beside the piano, his hand resting lightly on the young man's back, his breath betraying the truth of what was happening between them. That relationship continued quietly for more than a decade, out of fear of scandal. James never spoke of it publicly, nor dared to admit it even to close friends. By November 1989, the young singer began running high fevers that wouldn't break, his breathing a ragged wheeze as though someone were crushing his chest. In just 2 weeks, he lost more than 20 pounds, his cheeks hollow, his eyes sunken deep. Purple sores spread across his arms, neck, and chest, and doctors determined it was fungal pneumonia complications after HIV had ravaged his immune system. He was admitted to St. Mary's Medical Center in Los Angeles. Every morning, nurses changed bedsheets soaked through with sweat and bodily fluids. The pain in his lungs grew so severe that he could hardly lie still. His back bent forward, his trembling hands too weak to hold a spoon of medicine. On the small bedside table, he kept an old Bible with a frayed spine beside a black-covered notebook. On nights when he couldn't sleep, he would open the notebook, writing down memories of the hidden years he'd spent with James Cleveland, the fear of being abandoned, and the shame that swallowed him day by day. In those slanted, wavering lines, he described the relationship lasting more than a decade. recalling the nights they hid in the studio after choir rehearsals and the years he was consumed with guilt. He folded the paper, sealed it in a yellow envelope, and addressed it to the editorial office of a small Los Angeles newspaper. At dawn on November 29, 1989, his fever spiked over 104 degrees, and his lungs seized until he gasped for every breath. A few hours later, his heart stopped in the cold hospital room, leaving only the fading whir of the ventilator. It was not until a year later that the envelope was opened, revealing a secret that shocked the entire church community, leaving a stain that for years no one dared to mention. 15. David Cole, the all-night party in the penthouse. David Cole was once known as the musical mastermind behind many of the 90s dance hits. He grew up in Johnson City, Tennessee, and from a young age was obsessed with the piano, spending most of his time practicing DJ sets in an old storage shed. When he and Robert Clavilles created C+C Music Factory, David quickly rose to the top. Gonna Make You Sweat swept across dance floors, making him a star overnight. Everyone looking in thought his life was all glamour, but few knew that behind the lights were long nights steeped in fear and explosive secrets. At the height of the group's fame, rumors started circulating about the all-night parties in a Manhattan penthouse, hard liquor, drugs, then secret affairs with young male dancers behind locked doors. In 1993, an anonymous dancer sent a letter accusing David of infecting him with HIV after one wild night, though no one could confirm the truth. The rumors closed in around him, fueling his sense of guilt. By the end of 1994, while producing a new album, David suddenly coughed up blood and collapsed onto the mixing console. His body had shriveled to just over 110 pounds, his face gaunt like a ghost. Doctors determined he had HIV-related meningitis, forcing him into secret hospital stays to hide his condition. In his final days, David recorded a cassette tape, his voice hoarse, leaving an apology to his elderly mother for all the things he had never dared to say out loud. On January 24, 1995, he took his last breath in a cold hospital room. Afterward, many accused the record label of bribing nurses and reporters to keep the group's image clean, though the controversy never ended. The beats David created continued echoing across dance floors, a reminder of glory and the price it demanded. 14. Kenny Green, The Last Confession. Few knew that near the end of his life, Kenny Green confessed in a notebook that he had lived two lives that never dared to touch. It was a revelation that shocked many when it was discovered after his funeral. Kenny was born and raised in Harlem, New York, in the 90s. He became the soul of the group Intro, the man behind hits that moved the R&B world. Their cover of Ribbon in the Sky is still considered one of the most beautiful ballads of the decade. But when the stage lights went dark, Kenny returned to his apartment and locked himself away with secrets no one else knew. Around March 1997, rumors began to spread. An entertainment reporter received an anonymous envelope containing a copy of a letter. In it, a man claiming to be a studio technician said that for years they'd maintained a romantic relationship. Interspersed with the times, Kenny returned to an older woman. She was also the one who had helped him secure his first record deal. The letter detailed nights in September 1996 when they met in a Brooklyn studio where Kenny wore no masks at all. 2 years later, his health declined rapidly. Kenny began coughing without relief, his lungs so weak that many nights he had to be on a respirator. On October 15, 1999, he decided to go public in Vibe magazine that he was HIV positive, ending all speculation. He said he was tired of pretending to be strong and perfect. In his final months, Kenny recorded a song that was never released, his voice raw, every lyric steeped in bitterness. He left behind the cassette and the notebook, confessing that his greatest regret was not having the courage to live honestly sooner. On October 1, 2001, Kenny took his last breath in a small room where only the ventilator's fading hiss remained. After he died, public outcry erupted over homophobia and the music industry's cruel silence. But in the end, his music stayed behind, a reminder of courage and the price of silence. 13. Larry Levan falling for the manager and a bitter ending. Next comes a DJ who turned a dark room into a sanctuary for the lost Larry Levan. He was a genius who burned himself out on dance floors reeking of narcotics, carrying a deadly secret. Larry was born in 1954 in Brooklyn, growing up among crumbling housing projects, and he learned early to survive on music and recklessness. When Paradise Garage opened, he transformed it into a cathedral of house music. Every night, hundreds of sweaty bodies moved under strobing lights while Larry stood behind the mixer like a high priest holding their heartbeat in his hands. But behind the thundering bass lines was a life slowly poisoned, both literally and figuratively. In 1985, Larry fell for the club manager, a man who gave him love and also pushed heroin into his veins. They slept together, made music together, then fought in drug-fueled rages. On September 12, 1989, Larry learned he was HIV positive not long after. The former lover vanished, leaving him with crushing debt and a wound that never healed. Worse still, months later that same man sold a fabricated story to the tabloids, claiming Larry had caught HIV from prostitutes. The story spread across the underground scene, turning him into a symbol of disgrace instead of music. Then the nights of panic began. In 1991, Larry organized a series of funeral parties, farewell celebrations of his life. At the final party, as the clock neared midnight, he collapsed over the mixer, cold sweat streaming down his face. Hundreds of people froze as Larry whispered a trembling confession that he had HIV, his voice shaking under the howl of house music. A seizure hit, and staff dragged him from the stage, wrapping blankets around his convulsing body. The tragedy wasn't over, knowing he had little time left. Larry recorded a 7-hour mixtape, threading eerie beats with stories of a lonely childhood, addiction, and nameless nights of love. But on the night he died, November 8, 1992, the tape vanished from his small Manhattan apartment. Rumors claimed someone stole it to protect the secret of a famous DJ who had once slept with Larry. His death also remained steeped in suspicion. Some insisted Larry didn't die naturally of heart failure, but was given a fatal morphine injection to silence the truth that he had infected powerful figures in the dance scene. Yet, despite all the rumors and contempt, the music Larry left behind still lives on, like a blade etched deep into the memories of everyone who once lost themselves on the Paradise Garage floor. 12. Frankie Knuckles, the father of house music, and a plot to erase him. In the list of gifted black musicians who died from AIDS and the terrible disease that haunted their minds, there is a name that still makes many shiver to recall: Frankie Knuckles, the father of house music. If you ever stepped onto a Chicago dance floor in the 1980s, you surely heard his music, the rhythm that both liberated and cursed an entire generation. Frankie was born in 1955 in the Bronx, New York, but Chicago was where he built his legacy. The Warehouse Club where he DJ'd became legend, giving all those society cast aside a place to forget their names, skin color, and gender. Yet beneath the flashing lights and those nights remixing for Michael Jackson or Whitney Houston, Frankie hid his deepest fear that behind his back were men willing to kill to take over the dance floor. In early 1992, a Chicago drug kingpin pressured him to let the man launder money through the warehouse. When he refused, anonymous phone calls started coming in the middle of the night, threats so cold they kept Frankie awake, his hands trembling whenever he set the needle on a record. But the tragedy didn't stop there. That same year, he became entangled in a love triangle with a young dancer and a record producer. Both of those men contracted HIV and died within 3 years, leaving Frankie trapped in the guilt that maybe all of it was the curse he carried. He began living quietly, turning down many performance offers, slowly drifting away from the lights. The last nights of his life grew darker still. Frankie told his closest friend that he started seeing hallucinations: the warehouse dance floor flooded with blood, laser lights blazing red like an apocalyptic vision, the familiar bass lines twisting into endless screams. Every morning he woke up, he had to remind himself it was just a vision, not a real curse. On March 31, 2014, Frankie took his last breath from complications of diabetes combined with HIV. When Chicago named a street after him, people spoke of him as a symbol of freedom, but they also whispered that some tragic truths had sunk forever with him into the shadows of the dance floor. 11. Ricky Wilson, The Last Letter. You might have heard Rock Lobster, and thought it was so joyful you forgot the time. But behind that vibrant sound, Ricky Wilson, the quiet guitarist of the B-52s, spent his last days in a despair so deep no one could ever quite reach it. In the summer of 1985, when the band was preparing for a new tour, Ricky's health began to collapse quickly. Every morning he still came to rehearsal, but instead of laughing, he often sat silently for hours, his back against the wall, his hollow eyes staring at the wooden floor. Some days he didn't eat a single bite, his hands trembling around the guitar as he whispered he would die right there under the stage lights. At first, everyone thought it was exhaustion, but then Ricky began coughing up blood and losing weight uncontrollably. It wasn't only illness that haunted him. Just months before, the man he loved, a record cover designer, had also learned he was HIV positive. They had sworn they would go together if the disease grew too strong. But the man died first, leaving Ricky alone in that dark room from then on. He lived like someone waiting for the end, no longer caring to appear before the public. Then in early September 1985, Ricky painted a strange oil canvas. In it, he stood naked in a room as hundreds of pitch-black hands reached out from the corners to grab him. He did not sign it, just propped it against the studio wall and disappeared for days. When the band found Ricky, he was so thin he had to be lifted to his feet. After he died, the painting vanished too, as if no one wanted to keep the last evidence of that obsession. On October 12, 1985, Ricky took his final breath in a small room with only one bandmate holding his hand. 20 years later, his sister was cleaning the old storage room and found a folded letter in a guitar string box. "I have only a few weeks left to breathe." 10. Tony Thompson, the truth behind the complications. Imagine a drummer and musician who once lifted the entire disco world to its peak, but then ended in silence because of a secret no one dared to expose. This is the story of Tony Thompson, whom many believed carried the most feared disease of that era. In 1984, when chic was dominating every dance floor, Tony was diagnosed HIV positive. He panicked so badly he locked himself in a hotel room for 3 days, not eating, only staring at a ceiling stained with patches of damp. When he returned to the studio, he had to sign an agreement of absolute silence. The label feared that if the news got out, all performance contracts with Madonna and Diana Ross would disappear overnight. So, for nearly 2 decades, Tony kept the secret while playing drum beats that made the world dance. But inside, he counted every breath, dreading the moment his body would fail on stage. On November 12, 2003, when Tony passed away, people only said he died from complications, but some whispered the truth about AIDS went to the grave with him. 9. Dennis Parker, the price of a Flesh for Fame deal. There are stories that the moment you hear them, you feel how in every glory there hides too big a price to pay. Dennis Parker, who once made Europe's dance floors go mad with Like an Eagle, was such a bitter proof. In the late 1970s, Dennis shone under the brilliant disco lights, his blonde hair flowing and his sensual voice driving fans crazy. But behind the scenes, he was paying with his own body. In a New York hotel room in 1978, Dennis agreed to a Flesh for Fame deal with 2 big producers. That night, they promised he would have an album released across Europe. And indeed, Like an Eagle was born, turning Dennis into a disco icon even he could hardly recognize. But the dazzling lights soon faded. By 1984, Dennis began coughing violently, losing weight beyond control. Every night, he sat alone in his cramped Manhattan apartment, wondering if the disease consuming his lungs was punishment for all the compromises he had once accepted. Close friends said he often muttered that he felt like he was rotting from the inside out. Just 1 year later, Dennis died from AIDS complications. When the disco music finally went silent, people realized that beneath that glow, he was only a soul traded away far too soon. 8. Kenny Kirkland, the quiet ending in a private room. Next in the list of gifted musicians lost to the disease of the century is the almost unbelievable sad story of Kenny Kirkland. If you have ever heard his piano glide across recordings by Sting or Branford Marsalis, you might think Kenny was a calm, steadfast, unstoppable man. But the truth was completely different. By the late 1980s, when his tour schedule barely left a single day off. Kenny began turning to heroin to soothe the panic attacks. Many nights after performing, he sat slumped under a hotel staircase, clutching a thin coat, whispering that he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep playing. As time went by, his body was gradually worn away. By early 1998, Kenny had lost a shocking amount of weight, coughing so hard he had to stop in the middle of recording sessions, though the official documents said he died of heart failure. For years, many colleagues believed the real disease that killed him was HIV. Many thought he had hidden the deadly illness out of fear of stigma. And finally, on the morning of November 12, 1998, Kenny was found lifeless in his armchair, the piano still open to a piece he never had the chance to finish, an ending so quiet that no one heard a last goodbye. 7. Tony Cook, a wrong decision. Do you believe that just one night in Paris could decide the rest of an artist's life? The story of Tony Cook began like that, with a decision he never knew would become a death sentence. In June 1983, Tony was touring Europe with James Brown's band in Paris after a blazing 3-hour concert. He was invited to a private party at an underground funk club near the Champs-Élysées. That night, Tony was so drunk he couldn't remember how long he stayed in that VIP room with the long-haired, brown-skinned dancer. Just a few weeks later, back in New York, he started running fevers, developing swollen glands, and a relentless cough. By September 1983, a private doctor confirmed Tony was HIV positive. He was so devastated he almost confessed to James Brown. But the fear of losing his place as the youngest drummer in the band kept him silent. From then on, Tony lived like a man with two faces by day, drumming to make dance floors erupt, by night sitting alone in his small Harlem apartment, filling pages with stories about the dread eating away at his blood. Over the next 7 years, the disease advanced quietly. During a recording session in late 1990, Tony fainted in his chair, his face so gaunt the sound engineer didn't recognize him. Even so, official news of his HIV status never came out. When Tony died, people only said he passed away after a long illness. But soon after, a box containing Tony's illness diaries disappeared from the studio, sparking rumors that someone had tried to hide the truth to protect the reputation of the James Brown Band. And whenever on the floor rock it plays, people still dance, but somewhere in the music, memories of that fateful Paris night still rise, haunting. 6. Ron Richardson counting down to death. People remember Ron Richardson for a voice that thundered like a storm, but almost no one knew he spent his final years waiting for a cruel ending. During the run of Big River, when all of Broadway hailed him as the soul of the show, Ron hid a secret that could shatter his perfect image. He loved a young saxophone player who often waited backstage to hold him when the curtain fell. They rented an old room on 43rd Street, where Ron once said it was the only place he ever felt truly alive. But in the spring of 1986, his lover fell ill, burning with fever for weeks before dying in a hospital bed with HIV as the cause. After the burial, Ron began to unravel. Every morning, he took off his shirt in front of the mirror, stared at the purple spots on his skin, and told himself he was rotting away. In the end, when AIDS complications had wasted him to the point he no longer recognized his own reflection, his family found a cardboard box hidden under the bed. Inside were dozens of farewell letters, lines of shaky handwriting admitting he was too afraid to speak the truth, that every night he dreamed he would die on stage in front of hundreds of people. Only a few of those letters were ever published. The rest disappeared forever, like the voice that once amazed the world and then quietly faded. 5. William Smitty Smith dying for a secret. Perhaps the most painful thing is an artist who spent his life letting his music save others, only to die in silence because of a secret he never dared speak. William Smitty Smith, who once made thousands swoon with When I Die, lived his final years like a shadow in the 1970s while touring the US with Etta James. He sank into heroin to escape the exhaustion. Then, in the winter of 1982, after a night of drinking in New York, Smitty went to bed with a stranger, waking the next morning on sheets stained with blood, promising himself he would never mention it. A few years later, he began coughing endlessly, losing so much weight that colleagues didn't recognize him. when his private doctor said he was HIV positive. Smitty almost completely broke down. From then on, he vanished from parties, refused interviews, avoided his friends' eyes, living quietly in a small apartment every night. He would rest his hands on the piano keys and cry alone. It all ended in 1997 when Smitty died by himself in a room so silent people said it sounded like the last breath of a soul that had left long before. 4. Jermaine Stewart, One Reckless Night. Few knew that the night Jermaine Stewart collapsed in a Los Angeles studio in 1991 began a chain of tragedy that could never be undone. That day, while recording background vocals for a new single, he coughed so violently that blood splattered across the console. That night, a doctor confirmed he had been HIV positive for years, likely infected after a reckless night during a European tour. The news was like a blade that severed all illusions about his future. From then on, Jermaine shut himself away in a dark apartment, curtains always drawn because he said he didn't want anyone to see his decaying body. Whenever friends visited, he only shook his head, his voice hoarse as he said his body had become a cage holding all my regret. By the end of 1996, liver cancer tumors spread rapidly through his abdomen, causing so much pain he could no longer sit up. In March 1997, Jermaine took his last breath, and when medical staff entered, they found the cassette player still looping "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," a song that once made the world smile but now sounded like a bitter farewell. 3. Carl Bean, a dying lover with HIV and the fear that swallowed everything. From the start, Carl Bean knew his voice would bring not only glory, but disaster. In 1977, when he recorded "I Was Born This Way," Carl received dozens of death threats warning him never to come out as gay. Still, he stood before the microphone, pouring all his pride and fear into every line. Through the 1980s, as AIDS spread, Carl was caring for his lover dying of HIV while dreading he too was infected. By 1991, that fear became reality when the test came back positive. Even so, he struggled to keep it secret, not wanting to see disgust in the eyes of the same people who once cheered for him. In his final nights, Carl often sat alone in the old studio, playing the original tape of "I Was Born This Way," crying when he heard his own young voice. By August 2021, when complications had ravaged his lungs and liver, friends said he could hardly recognize anyone. Just days before his last breath, Carl scrawled one line on a scrap of paper: "If there is another life, I still want to sing this song, but I never want to die for being cast out." 2. Gil Scott-Heron, HIV complications. They called Gil Scott-Heron the godfather of spoken word, a man who dared to turn his voice into a weapon that made America tremble. But behind the fame, he lived with a fear that never let go. In 1995, while Gil was recording in a small Harlem studio, he suddenly passed out mid-session. When he woke on the hospital bed, the doctor looked him in the eye and said his HIV test was positive. From that day, he left every booking, cutting off contact with nearly all collaborators. Through the late 1990s, his apartment became a voluntary prison. Then, one autumn night in 2000, a neighbor heard him screaming in a fever, saying the room was full of the ghosts of people who died of AIDS, all of them calling his name. By early 2011, Gil had wasted away so much he could no longer recognize himself in the mirror. On May 27, 2011, his final breath slipped away. Though the death certificate clearly said HIV complications, everyone knew the real disease that killed him was loneliness and shame that never loosened their grip. One Eazy-E infected by betrayal. And finally, there was Eazy-E, who once believed he was invincible in Compton, his fierce rap turning him into a living legend, a man who dared defy every prejudice and flood America's airwaves with fear. But in the spring of 1995, when a doctor coldly announced he had HIV, all that glory collapsed in an instant. Just weeks later, he had wasted to skin and bone, lying still in a sterile white room at Cedars-Sinai, his chest tightening with every breath. Friends said that on his final night. Eazy held his new wife's hand, his eyes lost in a haze of regret and delirium, whispering that if he had one more chance, he would live long enough to see his children grow up. After he died, Rumors spread that someone had secretly injected HIV-tainted drugs into a syringe Eazy never suspected. A cold revenge in the power struggles of rap. At dawn on March 26, 1995, his last breath ended the short journey of the gangsta rap king, closing the fates of the black artists who died of the century's plague, leaving a bitter warning that glory is never immune to the brutal cost of risk. If you have watched this far, these stories have probably left you both shocked and heavy-hearted as AIDS destroyed so many dreams of gifted black musicians. Leave a comment to tell us what you found the most painful in these 19 tragedies. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell to keep exploring the haunting secrets behind the stage lights.